NASCAR wraps up its abbreviated West Coast tour with Martin Truex Jr. finding victory lane for the first time this season. 5 different winners through the first 5 weeks this season. We're going to talk about Truex. We're going to talk about Bubba Wallace having his best race of the season. We're going to talk about the Hendrick cars from last to first, then back to last, then almost to first. We'll talk about all the top finishers and a whole lot more in tonight's episode. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. We're talking all things Instacart 500 from Phoenix Raceway. I've seen a lot of people trashing Phoenix. You know, tonight's race had the most lead changes at a Phoenix race since 2013, according to Jeff Gluck. You know, sure, is Phoenix my first choice to be the host of Championship Weekend? Maybe not. I like Homestead. There's some other great tracks out there, but Phoenix Raceway is a beautiful racetrack in my opinion. I think it's not getting the respect it deserves. I thought today's race was pretty good overall. A lot of very interesting storylines that we will get to, and of course at the end I'll put this thing on the Groovy gauge, so stay tuned. Firstly, Out of the Groove is sponsored by Bayer Aspirin, the wonder drug available at Walmart for pain relief, for stroke prevention, for heart health. Aspirin has what you need. Bayer, a trusted brand, great supporters of Out of the Groove and of NASCAR. Bayer Aspirin is available at Walmart everywhere. Thank you to them for sponsoring this episode. Let's begin by looking at the top finishers. I do want to talk about Martin Truex Jr., but I want to talk about a lot of other drivers. The contenders, the expected contenders, made themselves felt today. Top Finishers is presented by Fram. Martin Truex Jr. gets his first win of the season, his first win in the NASCAR Cup Series since way back Martinsville early last season. So it's been a while for Martin Truex Jr. This is just his second win with James Small as his crew chief, but it was a convincing win at that. He had the best car on the long runs most of the day, but it was a late race restart where he got the jump on Joey Logano, who actually was the control car. Logano chose the inside lane. Martin Truex Jr. was able to ride that high line, dip his right sides into that sticky stuff a little bit, stay alongside the 22 and pull past him before they even got back to the start finish line. So Martin Truex Jr., great on the long runs, but dangerous on the short runs as well. So Martin Truex Jr., congratulations to him. The second win this season now for Joe Gibbs Racing, but if you had told me coming into this year it'd be Martin Truex Jr. and Christopher Bell winning before Hamlin or Kyle Busch, I would have been a bit surprised, but lo and behold, that's where we are. I guess Kyle Busch did win the Busch Clash. He kind of lucked into that one, but we don't, it's not a points race. We don't talk about that. Sorry, Busch fans. We'll get to Kyle in a minute, and it's not good stuff, unfortunately. 5th different winner in 5 races so far this season. Is it too early to talk about the very real possibility that we end up with 16 or more unique winners in the regular season alone? If that happens, I'm not entirely sure how they would decide the final playoff spots. There'd be some sort of tiebreaker, either who's highest in overall points, maybe who has the most playoff points. I don't actually know how NASCAR would consider that. I should do my research because we're getting to the point where this may become a real thing. McDowell, Bell, Byron, Larson, and Truex, at least 3 of those 5, I think many of us are a bit surprised to see their names on the win list so far this year. Truex is really the first driver all season where I think, oh, is anyone really that surprised that Truex got a win early in the season? I mean, that being said, he did only win 1 race last year, while his teammate Hamlin won a bunch, so maybe it's a little surprising still, but it's not a shock to see Martin Truex Jr. run well early this season. But congratulations to him. Joe Gibbs Racing and Team Penske, as you can see by these finishing results, dominated today. Hendrick Motorsports wasn't too far off, but Hendrick Motorsports kept digging themselves into a hole. Byron, Larson, and Elliott all had to start at the rear of the field for either failing inspection pre-race or for unapproved adjustments. They slowly and methodically worked their way through the field. Kyle Larson seemed to be, for the second week in a row, the best out of the Hendrick stable, but Chase Elliott came out of nowhere to finish top 5, as you can see, and William Byron was consistently in the top 10. Larson and Elliott had to overcome additional penalties during the race. Larson sped on pit road twice, including under green. That's usually a death sentence, but he had enough speed in that 5 car to stay in contention. Elliott sped late as well at the beginning of stage 3, but he was able to work his way through the field very slowly and methodically, but he was there when it counted to get a solid top 5. Kevin Harvick, the Phoenix Master, once again carries the torch for Stewart-Haas Racing the way he basically has been for several years now. I don't want to disrespect Eric Almirola. He ran top 10 late in this race. He also had a speeding penalty and bounced back to finish 11th, so pretty solid for him. But Custer, he got spun by Bubba Wallace late, did not get a great finish. Chase Briscoe was in the top 15 or so until I believe he had a speeding penalty. So many speeding penalties. Phoenix has that weird curved pit road, so guys maybe mess up where the timing lines are and get caught. That seemed to be the case because there were many speeding penalties today, more than we usually see in a NASCAR Cup Series event, and it derailed some guys' runs. I didn't mean to fly past him, but Joey Logano, I believe, led the most laps today. He ends up finishing 2nd. It was weird because At no point in this race did I really feel like Joey Logano had the strongest car, but he's a great race car driver. He won at Phoenix a year ago, so we know he's good at this racetrack. And his pit crew, every time down pit road, he was gaining spots. So he often was able to control the restarts, and usually it worked his way. It did not work for him on that final restart when Martin Truex Jr. got the best of him. But Joey Logano showing why he's a world-class top driver in the Cup Series today, because I don't think he ever had the top car. He was a top 5 car for sure, but I don't know that he was ever number 1, but he kept that thing in the top spot for much of the day. So a great run for Penske, all 3 of their cars in the top 10. Got to give Alex Bowman a shout out, finishing 13th for Hendrick Motorsports. He was involved in one of the earliest wrecks of the day when he got stacked up behind Chastain, had to check up, got run over by Austin Dillon. Just a freak deal. I'm not blaming Austin Dillon for it, but he actually got some left rear damage, the 48 did, but battled back to contend for a top 10 spot late in this race, ends up 13th. So just wanted to give Alex Bowman a shout out for that resilient effort. Probably the largest incident of the day came when Anthony Alfredo got just taken out by Cody Ware out of nowhere. Fox didn't have a great angle of it, but it looked like Cody Ware just missed the corner or something and got into Alfredo's left rear, and they both went sliding up into the wall. Huge damage on Alfredo's car. Ultimately, it ended both of those drivers' day, but it was a weird situation because afterwards Cody Ware took to Twitter and effectively blamed Anthony Alfredo for the incident. I have to say, the irony of a Rick Ware racing car / driver calling another driver the lapped car in this incident, the irony is so thick, you have to be able to see that, right? But he's not wrong. Alfredo at the time, I believe, was a lap down. Cody Ware was early, was still in the lead lap, but he's really bought into this idea that it was Alfredo's fault. I need to see a better replay because it certainly did not look like that. It looked like Cody Ware didn't know where he was going, but I guess we never got a great angle, so maybe he knows something we don't. Either way, it was an ugly accident and unfortunately ended 2 young drivers' days very early on. I said I'd talk about Kyle Busch. He was probably the weakest of the 4 JGR cars throughout the first half of this race, and then during green flag pit stops, the same green flag pit stops Kyle Larson sped but managed to get back on the lead lap during. Kyle Busch, his team was hit with an uncontrolled tire penalty. Kyle Busch actually lost a lap, and he had a very difficult time. In fact, he never got that lap back because he was further deeper in the field than Kyle Larson was and just didn't have the speed Larson had. And like I said, didn't have the speed his teammates have. Kyle Busch, this is a completely new team, really. A new crew chief, a rookie crew chief with Ben Bayshore, and I believe that pit crew is not the same pit crew he was working with last year when he was teamed up with Adam Stevens and everybody. I believe JGR moved their pit crews around a bit as well, and so the pit crew with that penalty cost Kyle Busch dearly. Of course, later on he checked up and got run over by Ross Chastain late, so he ends up finishing 25th. Is it too early to panic if you're a Kyle Busch fan? I mean, he's struggled uncharacteristically now for more than a year. He's only won 1 race since the end of the 2019 season, and that is not the Kyle Busch we have come to know and either love or hate, depending on where you land. We knew the start of this year was going to be tough. Him being teamed up with a brand new crew chief, it got off to a great start with him stealing that win in the Busch Clash, but I think we all knew that was perhaps a fluke at the time, and they have not shown that kind of speed since then. But it's still a confusing team because despite them not showing speed consistently, I don't think at any point this year have been the best JGR car in the race. They've still, coming into this weekend, they were coming fresh off a 10th and a 3rd place finish. They finished 3rd at Vegas a couple weeks ago, despite Kyle Busch constantly complaining about the car over the radio. So it feels like this team has struggled mightily, but when you actually look at the stats, they didn't get great finishes at the 2 Daytona races, but when they finished races, they've been top 10, top 5 threats. Today was an outlier. They were maybe a top 10 car, maybe if they were lucky, but of course the pit road incident cost them dearly. But this is a difficult team to judge. Are they a championship contender right now? No. I don't think they're any better. If anything, they're maybe a little worse than they were a year ago when they were eliminated fairly early in the playoffs. So no, the 18 team is not a championship contender right now. So by that assessment, I would say yes, it is time to panic because Kyle Busch fans should expect Kyle Busch to be a championship contender year in, year out. He's a 2-time champion. He's driving for Joe Gibbs Racing. He should be up front and winning races. And right now, he has not shown any indication, that team has not shown any indication that they are capable of doing that reliably. So Kyle Busch and that entire 18 team, they've got to figure it out. We knew with Ben Bayshore coming in as a new crew chief, we knew it would take a few weeks for them to figure each other out, maybe even a couple of months. So I'm not in full-on panic mode just yet, but we need to start seeing improvement, and this week was not an example of that. Another Toyota driver that I have listed here finishing 16th that we have to talk about is Bubba Wallace. Now, 16th, while that is technically their best finish of the season so far, is not a great finish. This was by far 23XI Racing's best performance of the season. And Phoenix is a difficult track. It's a 1 mile track, a high horsepower, low downforce track, difficult on drivers, difficult on crew chiefs because turns 1 and 2 are completely different than 3 and 4. It's difficult to set the car up properly. But 2311 Racing ran inside the top 15 most of the day, and late in this race, late in stage 3, drove up into the top 10, drove up as high as 7th, making an impressive 3-wide move to get by Kevin Harvick and Ryan Blaney. That's right, he passed Kevin Harvick late in this race. Harvick, the Phoenix king. We finally got a real glimpse of the speed that 2311 is capable of. That car finally today looked like a TRD car. That's like, okay, that's what we expected we'd see at some point this season, and exciting that we're starting to see it early on. This is just the 5th race of the season, and here he was running up in the top 10, threatening to run in the top 5. Bubba Wallace should have gotten his first top 10 of the season today, if not for an inexplicable decision during the second to last caution period when every driver on the lead lap opted to hit pit road for fresh tires. Bubba Wallace and his crew chief Mike Wheeler, again, I don't know who specifically made the decision. Maybe it was Bubba's, maybe it was Mike Wheeler's. It was probably Mike Wheeler's, given that it's his job as the crew chief to usually lead these decisions. Their team chose to stay out. They were the only team to stay out. Their tires were only 7 or 8 laps old, so not the most wore out tires in the world, but Phoenix can be difficult on tires, and with the traction compound and with everybody else pitting for fresh tires, Bubba was in trouble. He fell from 1st to 16th in only about 16 laps. So rather than restarting 8th or 9th with fresh tires and maybe being able to work your way towards the top 5, instead he was put in a very vulnerable position there. Yes, on the front row, but with older tires than everybody else in the field. He was swallowed up immediately, spun the tires on the initial start, was middle of 3 wide before they even got through the dog leg. It was a disaster. And sure, in hindsight, we can all say, what was Mike Wheeler thinking? In the moment, I'm sure he thought, since most of the teams didn't have many laps on their tires, I'm sure he thought a few other guys would stay out and there'd be a buffer there and maybe it would work out for Bubba. But at the time, this restart was with like 50 laps to go. There was no way Bubba Wallace was going to hold on to the lead for 50 laps on older tires. So even in hindsight, I think in the moment I would have pit for fresh tires, come out 7th or 8th, and just race straight up for a shot at a top 5, because I think that was possible. They were having a really strong run up to that point, but that poor pit decision cost them a top 10 in my opinion, and cost them what would have been a benchmark finish for the season for this young team. Still, if you're a Bubba Wallace or 2311 fan, you gotta be excited, at least somewhat optimistic by the speed that team showed today. Too bad the finish and the pit decisions did not live up to that hype, but just want to get that out of the way. Bubba Wallace and 2311 starting to show signs, starting to show glimpses of that competitive speed we were promised in the offseason. But those are your top finishers. Now, let's talk about the race a bit more broadly, and then we'll put this thing on the Groovy gauge. As I said earlier, I feel like Phoenix is disrespected as a racetrack. It's one of my favorite tracks on the schedule, quite honestly. I will say the addition of the PJ1 this weekend didn't seem to be as effective as it was the 2 weekends last year. I mean, that being said, according to Jeff Gluck, as I mentioned at the top of the show, this race featured more passes for the lead than any Phoenix race since 2013, so clearly passing was not impossible. And I don't mean to say that it was. I thought good cars could easily pass lesser cars without too much issue. I mean, they had to work for it, which is great. You don't want guys to just blow by other cars. You want there to be some battles and effort there, but passing was more than possible. Many drivers worked their way from the back up towards the front multiple times today, so passing was possible. Phoenix is a good track. I don't love that the PJ1 is so valuable and that the PJ1 really is what defines the track. I wish we didn't need to put that, manufactured sticky stuff in the outside groove. I wish we could avoid that, but I don't think it hurt the racing in any significant way today. I thought the race was extremely entertaining. So with that being said, let's put this thing on the Groovy gauge. Yeah, fresh off 2 really great races at 2 intermediate tracks. I know, surprising. I'm as surprised as you guys are. We head to the 1 mile short track. Not a short, can I say short track? It's this 1 mile tracks are sort of this weird in between. This one races like a short track. We saw some bump and runs today. Some bump and runs and dumps occasionally today as well. But, Phoenix Raceway, I like it a lot. I thought today's race was very, very solid. I'm going to give today's Instacart 500 a 70% on the Groovy gauge. There was always at least one driver in the field making things interesting, whether it was Larson working his way through the field for the dozenth time, whether it was Bubba Wallace coming on strong late, whether it was Martin Truex Jr. hounding Joey Logano in some of those late race runs, whether it was that final restart where Truex actually beat Logano, surprisingly. This race always had something or someone interesting to watch. So I'm going to give it a 70%. It was a good race, not quite as thrilling or as exciting or quite the spectacle that the last couple weeks at Vegas and Homestead have been, but still a very good overall race. So let me know down below if you agree or disagree with my score. What would you give the Instacart 500 on your Groovy gauges. And that's really gonna do it for this episode. I haven't harped on Clint Boyer or Jeff Gordon or the broadcast too much today. I thought it was good. I do think they dwelled on the 2012 incident a bit too much, but if you've been following me on Twitter or watched any of my live streams, I feel like I've dwelled on those topics enough at this point. I still think it's a little bit weird that Clint Boyer is just laughing it up with Gordon. You know, yeah, it's 9 years later. I'm glad he's able to grow up and let it go, but at the same time, I mean, feels like in the moment that incident was quite controversial, and even to this day I don't know if I would fully forgive Jeff Gordon for that whole deal if I was in Boyer's position, but maybe he's just a bigger man, I don't know. But it does feel weird to see them kind of joking and laughing about something that at the time basically divided the entire NASCAR ecosystem so heavily. I just think it's a little bit weird to be laughing about not all this time later, but I thought, you know, it added some fun goofs and gaffes to the broadcast. I enjoyed it. I hope they move on from it and, you know, keep doing those pre-race skits because those are funny, but now hopefully let's move on past the Phoenix deal. I don't need to see Larry McReynolds squeeze into that 5-hour energy fire suit again. I love Larry McReynolds. Anyway, that's all I've got for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR news, notes, predictions, race reviews almost daily, and believe me, we will have plenty to talk about later this week. As always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters. Couldn't do this show without your support. We'll be back later this week. I'm repping the Out of the Groove Podcast Network t-shirt. You can get a t-shirt for yourself down in the description, but also be sure to listen to all of the new episodes from all the different shows on the Out of the Groove Podcast Network. That link is also down in the description below, and also my P.O. box that I reopened here just a few days ago. If you want to send me something, you might see it featured on Out of the Groove. You can check that address down below in the description as well. But that's all I've got. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. I'll see y'all later in the week.